became plain later. He was under deep disguise in the Pakistani city of Peshawar on September the 15th, not departing on an extensive and dangerous tour outside the Mount Redoubt, but returning from one. He was waiting for the arrival of the guide who would take him back into the Waziri Peaks and into the presence of the Sheikh himself. To protect him in his brief stay in Peshawar, he had been assigned 4 local zealots belonging to the Taliban movement. As befits men who originate in the northwestern mountains, the chain of fierce tribal districts that runs along this ungovernable frontier, they were technically Pakistanis, but tribally Waziris. They spoke Pashto rather than Urdu, and their loyalties were to the Pashtun people, of whom the Waziris are a sub-branch. All were raised from the gutter in a madrasa, or Quranic boarding school, of extreme orientation, adhering to the Wahhabi sect of Islam, the harshest and most intolerant of all. They had no knowledge of or skill in anything other than reciting the Quran, and were thus, like teeming millions of madrasa-raised youths, virtually unemployable. But given a task to do by their clan chief, they would die for it. That September, they had been charged with protecting the middle-aged Egyptian who spoke Nilotic Arabic but had enough Pashto to get by. One of the 4 youths was Abdullahi, and his pride and joy was his cell phone. Unfortunately, its battery was flat because he had forgotten to recharge it. It was after the midday hour, too dangerous to emerge to go to the local mosque for prayers. Al-Kur had set his orisons along with his bodyguards in their top-floor apartment. Then he had eaten sparingly and retired for a short rest. Abdullahi's brother lived several hundred miles to the west in the equally fundamentalist city of Quetta, and their mother had been ill. He wished to inquire after her, so he tried to get through on his cell phone. Whatever he wished to say would be unremarkable, just part of the trillions of words of chatter that pass through the ether of all 5 continents every day. But his phone would not work. One of his companions pointed out the absence of black bars in the battery window and explained about charging. Then Abdullahi saw the spare phone lying on the Egyptian's attaché case in the sitting room. It was fully charged. Seeing no harm, he dialed his brother's number and heard the rhythmic ringing tone far away in Quetta. And, in an underground rabbit warren of connecting rooms in Islamabad that constitute the listening department of Pakistan's counter-terrorism centre, a small red light began to pulse. Many who live in it regard Hampshire as England's prettiest county. On its south coast, facing the waters of the Channel, it includes the huge maritime port of Southampton and the naval dockyard of Portsmouth. Its administrative centre is the historic city of Winchester, dominated by its cathedral, almost 1,000 years old. At the very heart of the county, away from all the motorways and even the main roads, lies the quiet valley of the River Meon, a gentle chalk stream along whose banks lie villages and townlets that go back to the Saxons. One single A-class road runs through from south to north, but the rest of the valley is a network of winding lanes edged with overhanging trees, hedges, and meadows. This is farm country, the way it used to be, with few fields larger than 10 acres and even fewer farms larger than 500. Most of the farmhouses are of ancient beam, brick, and tile, and some of these are served by clusters of barns of great size, antiquity, and beauty. The man who perched at the apex of one such barn had a panorama of the Meon Valley and a bird's-eye view of his nearest village, Meonstoke, barely a mile away. At the time, several zones to the east, that Abdullahi made the last phone call of his life, the roof climber wiped some sweat off his forehead and resumed his task of carefully removing the clay peg tiles that had been placed there hundreds of years earlier. He should have had a team of expert roofers, and they should have clad the whole barn in scaffolding. It would have been faster and safer to do the job that way, but much more expensive. And that was the problem. The man with the claw hammer was an ex-soldier, retired after his 25-year career, and he had used up most of his bounty to buy his dream, a place in the country to call home at last. Hence the barn with 10 acres and a track to the nearest lane and then to the village. But soldiers are not always shrewd with money, and the conversion of the medieval barn into a country house and a snug home had produced estimates from professional companies that specialize in such conversions that took his breath away. Hence the decision that whatever time it took, to do it himself. The spot was idyllic enough. In his mind's eye he could see the roof restored to its former leak-proof glory, with 9/10 of the original and unbroken tiles retained, and the other 10% bought from a yard selling the artifacts of old demolished buildings. The rafters of the hammer-beam roof were still sound, as the day they were hacked from the oak tree, but the cross-battens would have to come off, to be replaced over good, modern roofing felt. He could imagine the sitting-room, kitchen, study and hall he would make far below him, where dust now smothered the last old hay bales. He knew he would need professionals for the electrics and the plumbing, but he had already signed on at Southampton Technical College for night courses in bricklaying, plastering, carpentry and glazing. One day there would be a flagstone patio and a kitchen garden. The track would be a gravelled drive, and sheep would graze the old orchard. Each night, camping in the paddock as nature favoured him with a balmy, late-summer heatwave, he went over the figures and reckoned that with patience and a lot of hard work, he could just survive on his modest budget. He was 44, olive-skinned, black-haired and eyed, lean and very hard of physique. And he had had enough. Enough of deserts and jungles, enough of malaria and leeches, enough of freezing cold and shivering nights, enough of garbage food and pain-racked limbs. He would get a job locally, find a Labrador or a couple of Jack Russells, and maybe even a woman to share his life. The man on the roof removed another dozen tiles, kept the 10 whole ones, threw down the fragments of the broken ones, and in Islamabad, the red light pulsed. Many think that with a prepaid SIM card in a cell phone, all future billing is cancelled out. That is true for the purchaser and user, but not for the service provider. Unless the phone is used only within the parameters of the transmitting area where it was bought, there is still a settling up to be accomplished, but between the cell phone companies. And their computers do it. As Abdullahi's call was taken by his brother in Quetta, he began to use time on the radio mast situated just outside Peshawar. This belongs to Pactel. So the Pactel computer began to search for the original vendor of the cell phone in England with the intent of saying electronically, "One of your customers is using my time and airspace, so you owe me." But the Pakistani CTC had for years required both Pactel and its rival Mobitel to patch through every call sent or received by their networks to the CTC listening room. And, alerted by the British, the CTC had inserted British software into its eavesdropping computers, with an intercept program for certain numbers. One of these had suddenly gone active. The young Pashto-speaking Pakistani army sergeant, monitoring the console, hit a button, and his superior officer came on the line. The officer listened for several seconds, then asked, "What is he saying?" The sergeant listened and replied, "Something about the speaker's mother. He seems to be speaking to his brother." "From where?" Another check. "The Peshawar transmitter." There was no need to tell the sergeant any more. The entire call would automatically be recorded for later study. The immediate task was to locate the sender. The CTC major on duty that day had little doubt this would not be possible in one short phone call. Surely the fool would not spend long on the line. From his desk, high above the cellars, the major pressed 3 buttons, and by speed dial a phone trilled in the office of the CTC head of station in Peshawar. Years earlier, and certainly before the event now known as 9/11, the destruction of the World Trade Center on the 11th of September 2001,